Penn State will be a top 6 team in 2023, in part because of their win in Pasadena this past Monday. The 11th ranked Penn State Nittany Lions, who are now 11-2 thanks to their Rose Bowl win, beat the Utah Utes, who were at the time ranked 8th in the country and are now 10-4 after their Rose Bowl loss. The Nittany Lions beat the Utes 35-21 in what was a game that mainly revolved around big plays. The first 2 drives of the game were both 10 plays or more, with Nicholas Singleton scoring on a 5-yard run, 11 plays, 82 yards, and 4 minutes and 51 seconds of clock chewed. Utah then responded with an even more time-consuming drive, an even more physical drive, with Thomas Yasmin catching a 1-yard pass from Cameron Rising on a drive that was 13 plays, 75 yards, and consumed 7 minutes and 12 seconds of clock. Mitchell Tinsley then followed that up with a 10-yard pass from Sean Clifford, and the final 2 drives of the first half were of around 3 minutes or less in time. But then, 14-14 at half, with Utah outscoring Penn State 14-7 in the second quarter, the Penn State Nittany Lions really began to take over. Their superior talent, their depth, a coaching staff that was overall much improved and more settled compared to 2021, a roster that was more overhauled and on the offensive side of the ball had more experience and was tougher, really began to take over. Nicholas Singleton, true freshman, 5-star running back in the 2022 recruiting class. Singleton and Kaytron Allen have been the 2 biggest impact freshmen on the Penn State roster. Both are running backs. Kevon Lee, Devin Ford, running backs who are, they're significantly older, haven't got anything close to the playing time that these 2 true freshmen have gotten. And Singleton's been more of the boomer bust guy, higher ceiling but lower floor. Kaytron Allen reminds me more of a power back, at least in comparison to Singleton, whereas Singleton's like the ultra. It's kind of like a Trevion Henderson, Mayan Williams, or Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins, really, with Singleton and Allen. And that's the best running back combo because it gives you the best of both worlds. If you have 2 backs like Singleton, you could run for 400 yards in one game, but then you could also be held for like 10 yards in another without that power element. And with Kaytron Allen, if you had 2 of them, you wouldn't get as many of the explosive, game-breaking plays that Singleton can give you. Speaking of the game-breaking play, Singleton had an 87-yard touchdown run, 3 plays, 95 yards. Penn State was pinned deep, and it looked very much like Utah could get in place with good field position and a chance to score. And Singleton ended that. Beautiful touchdown run. In the fourth quarter, after Cameron Rising, I think this was after Cameron Rising went down. He went down, I think, late in the third quarter, maybe early fourth. But regardless, some of the opt-outs in that Utah secondary were shown when Keandre Lambert-Smith, wide open, 88-yard touchdown pass from Sean Clifford, who played in a near-perfect game. Those 2 touchdown drives, which put up Penn State 28-14, that long touchdown somewhat effectively ending the game just from a standpoint of a fan and analyst of college football, those 2 drives combined were 6 plays, 189 yards, and took up like around 2 minutes and 20 seconds of clock. That is the summary of Penn State's offense the entire year. Big plays, explosive plays. They sometimes have consistent drives, but more often than not, it's a very opportunistic offense. You don't tackle Parker Washington, who opted out of this game, or Keandre Lambert-Smith, or let's say you let Nicholas Singleton juke out one of your defensive players, they're gone, and Penn State has 7. But if you can tackle if you're very solid defensively, if you have elite players, and if you play the perfect defensive game, you can, still shut down this Penn State offense. It's not like Georgia's, Ohio State's, Michigan, TCU's. It's not like a playoff caliber offense that's just guaranteed to score, several touchdowns a game. But this team is relatively young. This team has a lot of starters returning next year, and I want to combine, because it is a few days after the Rose Bowl, so this isn't just a reaction to the Rose Bowl. This is a reaction and almost reflection to this Rose Bowl win. Because I do think that Penn State, they're not just going to be top 10 in 2023. They're going to be top 6. This will be Penn State's best team next year since 2017, which was a really good Penn State team, if any of you remember that. In fact, I think that was the Penn State team in the James Franklin era with the highest ceiling out of all the teams. They did not win the Big Ten like the prior 2016 team, but they had a higher ceiling. They had a older, more mature, superior Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley. Their efficiency metrics were just off the charts. They were the most efficient team in the Big Ten. They had 2 losses by 4 points. One of them was against Ohio State, where they led for basically the entire game. The other was against Michigan State, where there was a several-hour weather delay, which certainly caused some issues, both for the attendance in Spartan Stadium and for Penn State's mental toughness, where Michigan State pulled out that game in stunning fashion. This Penn State team next year is going to be hard to stop. Their ceiling on both sides of the ball in this game looked limitless, and it will be that case next year. Penn State certainly could be in that Michigan-Ohio State playoff contender tier next season. Now, have they achieved what Michigan and Ohio State have over the past 2 years? Have they been as efficient with their talent as those? Have they had the same coordinators or even the same head coach performance? No. But they have Michigan's level of talent. They've actually been out recruiting Michigan over the past two recruiting classes, and counting 2022 and counting the current 2023 class, which will very, very likely finish ahead of Michigan. They're out recruiting Michigan, and schematically, they've improved. They're getting back to their roots with having a strong run game, and Penn State had Journey Brown in 2019, who peaked late. Unfortunately, an injury prevented him from playing, for the rest of his life. Penn State really hasn't had a caliber of run game that fits what Singleton and Allen have provided since Saquon Barkley was there again in 2017. This team, despite not having a level of offensive line or trench play that Michigan and Ohio State have, and partially because of coaching and also because of James Franklin's history with offensive lines, I don't think they will ever have a Michigan or Ohio State caliber offensive line. But what they can do is produce better and more amazing running backs in recent memory than both of those schools have. We'll have to see if Singleton improves next year over this past season. I'm pretty confident that he will, but we'll just have to see. One thing's for certain, though. Penn State's bringing in high talent. They're not afraid to use the portal. They don't lose a lot of players by my knowledge. They lost Parker Washington. They're losing Jair Brown, Joey Porter Jr., some others as well. But those are the biggest names. They return, from my knowledge, they do return a hefty amount of talent. You're returning Keandre Lambert-Smith. You're returning Kaytron Allen, Nicholas Singleton. You are losing Sean Clifford, but Drew Allar, who actually burned his red shirt this season, he's going to be the presumed starter. Clifford, by the way, let's turn our attention to him. He won the game MVP. 16 of 22 for 279 yards and 2 TD passes. He was perfect. He was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal on the field. He had above a 200 passer rating. Absolutely unbelievable. He averaged over 10 yards per pass. He actually averaged 12.7 yards per pass. He had a 92.4 QBR, and he had a 209.3 passer rating. He had the best game of his career. Penn State beat down a top 10 opponent. Drew Allar, we were just talking about him. He actually got one pass attempt. He was incomplete, 0 of 1, but he did get on the field at one point in the game. Utah is also very physical. I don't want to, limit credit from them. Both of these teams had multiple sacks. Penn State had 6, Utah had 3. Penn State had 9 tackles for loss and 3 passes defended. Utah had 7 tackles for loss and no passes defended. These teams are very physical. The amount of, TFLs and sacks do kind of go along with the sense that, these two teams have they have a better reputation of defensive lines and front sevens than they do offensive lines and, crazy good, explosive, and dominant offenses. But they are top 10 teams. I think that with the performance that both played in the Rose Bowl while Rising was healthy, because obviously a healthy Rising impacts Utah a lot, I think that both of these teams are top 10 teams in their own right. Penn State just proved themselves by the way that they won to be the better team. Both teams averaged over 4 yards per carry on the ground. Utah had 184 rushing yards for 4.3 yards per carry and 1 rushing touchdown. Penn State had 169 rushing yards, 5.5 yards per carry, and 3 rushing touchdowns. Interesting thing to note is that Penn State had a long of 87 on the ground. Utah had a long of 30. You take those away and they basically run for the same yards per carry, if not a little more, for the Utah Utes. But Penn State, again, when you have a running back like Singleton, those boom or bust plays, they can go either way, and they will tend to go more in the boom direction with a running back like Nicholas Singleton. He had 7 carries for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kaytron Allen actually led the team in carries with 11, but he only had 37 yards, averaged 3.4 yards per carry, and he had 1 rushing touchdown. Both very physical teams. The Nittany Lions are going to be near elite or elite in 2023. I think that, anything less than 10-2 would be severely disappointing for this team next year. There would probably be some that would argue that losing to both Michigan and Ohio State again with the amount of talent returning would be somewhat of a disappointment at minimum. I'm not going to comment on that. But I do expect Penn State to get double-digit wins next year. Utah, I would have to study on them more. I'm more of a Big Ten guy, so I'm much more in tune with the Big Ten, the depth charts of all those teams, the talent, recruiting, the staffs, much more than Utah. So if you're a Utah fan watching this, I apologize, but listen, Cameron Rising, I think, I don't know for sure, you can tell me in the comments down below, but he is a junior. He still has eligibility left. Micah Bernard did enter the portal the other day, but I think that's largely because Jaquindon Jackson has just taken over. 531 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns, and he has nearly 7 yards per carry. The man is an absolute beast. Utah is just, listen, they're good. They've won the Pac-12 2 years in a row. They've been competitive in the Rose Bowl for 2 years in a row against teams with vastly superior talent. There's an argument that Kyle Whittingham is the GOAT currently of the Pac-12, of the current coaching composition of the Pac-12, which to a certain degree, seeing that the Pac-12 has a lot of new faces and coaches, could be unfair or a quote-unquote easy achievement by some, but it's really not. You look at what Kyle Whittingham has done, whether he's been in the Mountain West Conference, the Pac-12 Conference, it is amazing. They are the Wisconsin And that's not even appropriate because Wisconsin fell apart under Paul Chryst. They're the Iowa/Wisconsin/Purdue. To make a Big Ten analogy, they take all the best attributes of all the Big Ten West teams and merge them together. And that's why they haven't fallen apart under the Kyle Whittingham era like some of these Big Ten West teams have. They can have a modern offense and good QB play like Purdue. They have solid tight ends and trench play like Iowa and Wisconsin. Their defense, like Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, very solid. It's always one of the best in their conference. So both these teams I anticipate will be good next year, but my eyes are really on Penn State with what they return, especially at the running back position and the potential they have at quarterback with Drew Allar. Utah's opt-outs certainly limited their performance on both offense and defense. Utah had a secondary player opt out for the NFL. I do temporarily, his name escapes me, but you could tell that Utah's secondary, like, last year when they played against Ohio State, it is certainly, the weakness of that defense. It was Clark Phillips III, who opted out for the NFL. But also Dalton Kincaid, who's one of the biggest receivers and possibly one of the best tight ends in the nation. He opted out for the NFL. And Tavion Thomas, running back for Utah, also opted out. You could tell that, Kincaid and Phillips really hurt Utah in their efforts. Because Rising went 8 of 21 for 95 yards, a TD, and a pick. He had an 85.1 QBR, and that's because he averaged 6.2 yards per carry on the ground and had 56 rushing yards. He carried the team on his back, and even though Bryson Barnes technically had a better passer rating, when you look at the play that he exhibited, the team fell apart once he came in. They had to simplify the offense. A lot of it was checkdowns. He was not even close to the same quarterback that Rising was. The opt-outs really did hurt the Utes. Cameron Rising, to continue that, was carrying the Utes on his back. The injury meant game over. Like, the minute he was injured, I was like, wow. Now, part of me thought that you never know, because if you have been a longtime viewer of this channel, you know I do not like James Franklin's game management. If you're a Penn State fan, you know that James Franklin will find ways to lose games in the fourth quarter. It's somehow worse than the way that Jim Harbaugh finds ways to lose games. It's somehow even worse. And I'm not talking even about modern Jim. I'm talking about like 2016 to 2020 Jim Harbaugh having some terrible game management. But Franklin this year, I think, has been actually very respectable at game management. And the way that Penn State won the Rose Bowl, complete evidence of that. There were no questionable decisions that were made in that Rose Bowl by Penn State. Rising this year has had 3,034 passing yards. He averages 7.9 yards per pass, 26 passing touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He's a 149 passer rating, and he has the 9th best QBR in the nation with an 83 rating. Very good QB. Kyle Whittingham has lost 2 Rose Bowls in a row, but the season overall was a great success, and Utah fans should be very happy with their team. To go on to Penn State, Sean Clifford had his best career game and finished off his tenure with class. He was named the game MVP, 16 of 22, 279 passing yards, 12.7 yards per pass, 2 passing touchdowns, played the game of his life. His career statistics, he's completed 833 passes on 1,357 attempts, completed 61.4% of his passes. He's passed for 10,661 yards, averaged 7.9 yards per pass, passed for 86 touchdowns, 31 interceptions, has a long of 95. He's been sacked a total of 95 times, and overall he has a 143.7 passer rating. in completion percentage, in completion percentage, touchdown passes, and sacks and passer rating, Sean Clifford has had his best season. And these are statistics of a starter, not counting his backup season in 2018. In completion percentage, in touchdown passes, in the number of interceptions thrown, number of sacks, and his passer rating, they were all career bests. He's also had a career 1,073 rushing yards for 2.8 yards per carry and 15 rushing touchdowns with a long of 62. His long of 62 on the ground was achieved this year. He had a career tied for career best in rushing touchdowns this year with 5. So absolutely, go down in history as one of the better Penn State QBs. We'll see what he does in the NFL. He'll probably be signed to a practice squad. We'll see if he can move up the chains from there, or if he'll go into coaching, or if he'll use his degree. But his name is written in Penn State history. Played 4 years as a starter with the Nittany Lions. Penn State dominated Utah in the trenches, and they had the superior run game. And Nicholas Singleton was a huge part of that. And then finally, want to talk about this for, let's just say 2-3 minutes. Penn State in 2023, the Nittany Lions will be one of the nation's best teams. One of the nation's best teams. And I do want to briefly preview their schedule. Just go over it like a few seconds per opponent. They open up with West Virginia in Beaver Stadium on September 2nd. Delaware, September 9th. They play their first conference game and first road game at Illinois, September 16th. They return home to host Iowa, September 23rd, which should be their best matchup of the month of September, as I think Iowa's going to be a very solid team next year with what they return on defense, O-line, and then bringing in Cade McNamara and Eric all through the portal. September 30th, Penn State travels to Northwestern. They have a bye week the 7th. They host UMass October 14th. Travel to Ohio State October 21st, which should be the first game that Penn State is an underdog in, and potentially the only game all year that Penn State's an underdog in. The 29th, they return home to face Indiana. They travel on the road November 4th to play Maryland. They host Michigan November 11th, which should be the whiteout game. The fact that it's in November, though, and, November night games aren't a thing, it very realistically could be Iowa. Maybe they pull it for West Virginia, but Iowa or Michigan should be it. November 18th, they host Rutgers, the Nittany Lions do, and November 25th, their last game of the season, as per usual, is on the road at the Michigan State Spartans. With this schedule, I see Penn State going 10-2, and then if they're to have one more win or one more loss, if I had to choose between the two, I'd actually go with one more win and say they could go 11-1. I think that this team is more likely, with the talent they have on their roster and with the fact that the Big Ten as a whole is becoming more top-heavy, this year's evidence of that they very well could be more likely to go 11-1 than 9-3. But I'd say 10-3 by a mile, just with the fact that they have Michigan State, Ohio State on the road, and then they have Michigan at home, and also they have a solid crossover game with Iowa at home. You just never know with that combination of 4 games. I think that the Nittany Lions will split those 4, most likely losses, of course, being at Ohio State and hosting Michigan. But the talent that they have with Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen is crazy. And last but certainly not least, I do want to dive into their recruiting class, because Penn State had impact freshmen this year. Why couldn't they have some next year? Jevin Williams, top 30 prospect, offensive tackle, 5-star. Alex Birchmeyer, interior offensive lineman, 44th best player in the nation. So you have their best two prospects are offensive linemen, and seeing that Penn State's had a weakness there, maybe they could get in the rotation there on offensive line. With linebacker, you have Tony Roas, who's a top 100 player. You have King Mack and Elliott Washington at safety, who are some of the better safeties in the country. They're both top 10 at their position. Andrew Rappelia, a tight end, who's 7th at his position, 143rd nationally. It's a lot of defense, tight ends, offensive line players. Your first running back is London Montgomery, who's not even top 350, but that's because, you got Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen. You don't need to recruit heavy at running back this season. And Penn State's, they have a quarterback, Jackson Smolik. That's their best quarterback they have. Riley Thompson, Storm Duck, and I think Dante Cephas. I don't know if he's officially transferred to Penn State or if he's just crystal balled there. Those are the 3 incoming players in the transfer portal for Penn State thus far. So I think Penn State is gearing up to have a complete monster season entering 2023. And I cannot wait for the 2023 Big Ten season, because the 2022 Big Ten season ended when their 2 playoff participants sadly lost. Penn State was the only team for the Big Ten to win their New Year's Six Bowl, much like Wisconsin did in 2016 when everyone thought the Big Ten was strong and had multiple potential playoff winners as well. But I think the Big Ten, the East, you could have 3 top 6, 3 top 5, heck, even 3 top 4 teams. Like, just from a pure perspective of how they play on the field, not including, strength of schedule, strength of record, or, all that stuff. But by terms of quality of play on the field, they could have 3 of the 4 best teams in the country this next season, with Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. And that's all I have to say for this video. If you are a Ute or a Nittany Lion, you should be excited for your teams next season. The Utah Utes, they do more with less. And Penn State right now, they have finally found what fits their roots: a strong run game and a defense that, although I still don't know if I'm bought in on Manny Diaz, I don't think I am, against every team but Michigan this year, they did fairly well against big plays. And for that I commend them. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.